The Denver Broncos running back competition seems wide open. Is Javonte Williams' spot in question? We'll tell you why we think it may be here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day, wherever you get your podcast. Just a reminder, you can get us for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Take us with you on the go, to the gym, wherever, so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I cover the team in person in Dove Valley every single day. I also write stuff over there at milehighsports.com. Joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. Has been covering the Broncos for a handful of years, bringing you up-to-date coverage over there, predominantlyorange.com. And really, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers, they get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. So make sure you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started here. And really, Broncos Country, today's show outline what you can expect. Competition at the running back position seems wide open here for the Denver Broncos. That running back 3 spot, it is wide open as well. Is Jaleel McLaughlin in a position to take over in a premier role this year? And is Javonte Williams in danger of maybe losing his starting job this year? These are all things we're going to break down and kick things off on today's episode of the show. So Sayre, really kind of opening things up here. All eyes, like for Broncos Country, we're talking about the quarterback competition, talking about a lot of things. But I felt like last week when we met with Sean Payton at the podium, and after watching practice, after watching guys get reps, Sean said that there's a ton of competition at running back. And I think when people heard him say that, I think a lot of people say, okay, well, maybe it's that running back 2, running back 3 spot. I honestly have a feeling like there's a vibe, and this is just my general observation. Part of me feels like maybe the running back 1 spot is a competition for a multitude of guys here, which, to be honest with you, Sayre, it's not necessarily a bad thing for the Broncos if that is the case.
Right, because after what we saw last year with Javonte Williams, I don't know how you can go into this offseason believing that he is the unquestioned, like, hey, nobody's touching Javonte's spot there as running back 1 of the Broncos. I mean, over the last 4 games of last season, he averaged under 3 yards a carry. And I know that it wasn't all on him, right? Of course, there's times when, the offensive line was having to, deal with a lot of stacked boxes, a lot of loaded boxes, a lot of aggressive defenses that were trying to force the Broncos to throw the ball, whether that was the back end of Russell Wilson's time or, hey, Jarrett Stidham's out there, they're going to attack the line of scrimmage, make him throw the ball. So it was tougher for Javonte in that regard, but I think we all saw the same thing last year, which is he struggled to break tackles, which is his hallmark as a player. That's what makes him a special running back. And then at the same time, like, he was out there dropping passes. They were swinging the ball to him out in the flat area, and he was just dropping the ball, or he wasn't able to get any wiggle room after the catch. Just looked like he was kind of dragging some cinder blocks or something there. So to me, I don't understand how anyone could think that Javonte's spot in the depth chart is safe. I don't even know if his spot on the roster is safe. And I think that that's saying something because, like you said, it feels like there's competition brewing all over the depth chart at this particular position. I think it starts with whether or not Javonte is even going to keep his starting job.
Well, I don't think it would necessarily be a bad thing if Javonte's challenged for that spot either. I mean, look, last year we saw a wide variety of different guys emerge at the running back spot. Like, Javonte was, a guy who saw a lot of early action probably at the midway point of the season. Jaleel McLaughlin, because Javonte had the injury against Chicago, Jaleel came in and was a little bit of the hero at the running back spot. And then Samaje Perine came out of nowhere for a few weeks for the Broncos. And all of a sudden it's like, all right, hey, like there is no like rhyme or reason as to like what's going on with this Broncos running back room. I will say the one game that Javonte had against the Buffalo Bills last season, like just think about how often the box was stacked there against him. But he made moments and he came up big in some clutch situations. And I'm like, all right, like Javonte still has it in him, right? And I think we've all been on the show and we've acknowledged like, hey, like there's an adjustment period. The fact that he was able to come back from his injury as fast as he did, be ready for day 1 of training camp, remarkable, right? I mean, you can even say it's miraculous at that point. But at this point, this juncture, like the Broncos need to be better overall on the offensive side of the ball. And that means that, hey, like certain guys' spots may not be just guaranteed or solidified anymore. And that's not a knock on Javonte in any way, shape, or form. I think that if Javonte Sayre can get back to who he was 2 years ago before the injury, running with authority, running through guys, and just find that, I would say, confidence as a runner once again, that maybe sometimes we didn't see a lot of consistency with last year. I think unquestioned it'll be his spot here, but I do think it is kind of nice to shake things up a little bit and have competition. I mean, look how much this roster has changed this offseason. Look how much the philosophy of this team has changed after the team decided to move on from vets like Justin Simmons, Russell Wilson. I mean, there's a whole wide variety of changes that this team has made that you look at it and it's like, all right, well, if those guys can be released or moved on from, like anybody at this point on the Broncos roster, maybe outside of Patrick Surtain, can be moved on from at some point. We understand the business nature of the NFL, but obviously another nature of that is like, hey, like you have to come back and you have to have a bounce back year. And I think for Javonte, it seems like he's still trying to get, just more work done, right? Because what I observed last week at OTAs, Javonte, not only was he getting reps, obviously, with the ones with Bo Nix, but he was also getting reps with the second team unit. So for part of me here is wondering, Sayre, based on what we saw in terms of Javonte and his usage, getting work with the top 2 units for Denver last week at practice, is that more of a conditioning thing? Is that more of a, hey, let's just get him as many reps as we can? Or is that like, hey, there's competition, so we want to see what everybody can do here? I think it could be a little bit of both, which in my opinion, not necessarily a bad thing for Denver, and especially if they're trying to raise the ceiling and the performance of that offensive side of the ball this year.
I think it has to be exactly what you just said in terms of rotating the guys into the first unit and not allowing that to just be, hey, Javonte's taking all the reps with the first team this offseason. I don't think they can do that. And I guess if you want to look at this from a misery loves company perspective, I mean, the entire AFC West at the running back position kind of stinks, right? I mean, Javonte, believe it or not, he was one of only 2 guys in the entire currently in the AFC West right now, whether that's guys who came in from new teams or whatever. He was one of only 2 guys, the other being Isaiah Pacheco of the Chiefs, to have over 1,000 scrimmage yards last year. So it's kind of crazy when you think about it that way. The position in the, I guess, broad spectrum of the NFL was kind of down last year. So maybe that's a to Javonte's credit kind of thing. Like he was still able to get over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. Yeah. And that's largely because of the fact the Broncos, they force fed him the ball. I mean, they were like, no, you will take, it's like on the Grinch when they're feeding him all the fudge. And he's like, what even is that? Like that was Javonte getting the ball last year. He's like getting fed all these different carries and touches, and he's trying to come back from a major injury. And it's like, you're running behind a new offensive line. You're playing in a brand new offense. Like if you want to play, I guess, a little bit of devil's advocate, because I think a lot of times people like to oversimplify it. Like, oh, he's cooked. He had a bad year last year. And so let's think of the next new thing. Audric Estime. All right, let's go. We're going to have the rookie of the year at running back. It's like, well, don't give up on Javonte necessarily just yet. I mean, yes, I think both things can be true. Like he can have a bounce back year upcoming. And also he kind of stunk last year a little bit. He wasn't himself, not the guy that we saw in 2021, but you have to balance this idea of giving him grace for coming off injury, playing in a new offense, playing behind new offensive linemen, getting a lot of those touches and having to fight through probably a lot of pain, getting a lot of treatment throughout the season. I mean, there's a balance of these two things. We're being critical of what we saw, which was a guy didn't create yardage after contact, and his whole game is the success of his game is based on creating yardage after contact, but also there's all these other circumstances. So anytime guy goes into a contract year too, Cody, I mean, especially when the narratives are, is he even going to be the starter this year? Like, you don't think Javonte's hearing all this stuff going into a contract year? Like, I hope he goes out, Cody, and I hope he's winning angry run scepters every single week.
Well, that's the hope. And if he is doing that, the Broncos are going to be in a good shape offensively, especially if the run game can get going. But if Javonte's job is in danger, why might Jaleel McLaughlin be the top option who could see a more prominent role in 2024? We're going to break that down here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode, Locked on Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know, at FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And right now is the perfect time to get involved in what they have going on, because right now it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL as the playoffs get a little bit deeper. We already know the Celtics are going to the NBA finals. Will the Mavericks join them? And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own by participating, because if you sign up today as a brand new customer, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you believe that one of the matchups on the money line in terms of the NHL playoffs, you can go and place any bet, right? Place $5 on anything from a money line, from point spreads, or even player props. And if your bet wins, you're going to get $150 deposited into your account. That's $150 that you can use to bet on spreads, to bet on money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook.
The Denver Broncos' fastest running back might be even faster in 2024. We're going to talk about Jaleel McLaughlin and why the potential joker in this offense may have a little more speed for this year, according to what Cody saw at OTAs. But want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you who make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, wherever and however you get your podcast. And for you everydayers out there, you know that if you subscribe to the YouTube page, you just might get a fireworks show. And if you haven't seen one of those yet, you got to tune in to watch and find out. But look, maybe you're like me and you're getting sick of national media not talking about your favorite team, especially when the Denver Broncos, they haven't been great. They don't have Peyton Manning on the roster. They're ESPN, all those other places, they ain't talking about the Broncos. That's why you need to make switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. And Locked On Sports today, hey, they're going to bring you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, and it's streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And speaking of our team, Cody, let's talk about this, the Jaleel McLaughlin, the guy who kind of shocked a lot of people last year coming out of Youngstown State, and really, I think maybe you could say he was the most effective per touch back on the Broncos roster in 2023. Now, going into year two, there's questions. Like, the Broncos just drafted a guy. They brought in an undrafted free agent who got a lot of guaranteed money for an undrafted free agent. But you saw Jaleel out there at the beginning of OTAs. What did you see from him, and what should fans be looking for in terms of his overall game in 2024?
Well, I mean, he still has the chip on his shoulder, and he certainly runs like it. I mean, I don't know if anyone, like, if you want to see the clip, Broncos Country, we can't share it here on the podcast in any way, shape, or form. Can't show the footage on here, which is unfortunate. I'd love to do that because I capture a lot of good stuff there. But if you want to see what I'm talking about, like, go on my social media feed on Twitter and then see the video clip I posted of Jaleel. Just watch him. Like, Jaleel in person, I don't know if it was just because we're a little bit closer, but like, he looked significantly faster than he did last year. Now, granted, he's not wearing shoulder pads. Those tend to weigh you down a little bit. But he also looks like he bulked up, added a little bit of muscle this offseason as well. So it seems like there could be some more balance to his game this upcoming season. But that explosiveness factor, Sayre, that we saw on display at times last year, you see that during practice. You see his vision, which I think his vision is very, very solid, especially when you talk about trying to get to the outside. Like, that's an area where we talked about where maybe Javonte struggled a little bit. Like, when you're on an outside run, your vision to see the cutback, like, at times it wasn't there for Javonte. He missed it. Jaleel's got really good vision. He's got really good speed. And as we saw, if he gets around that bend, around that corner and down the sideline, it's going to be a big gain. It's going to be a big play. We saw that time after time last year in various games. But then there were times where it's like, all right, like, teams started to figure out when Jaleel was in, like, all right, hey, we know exactly what's going to happen. If Jaleel's in some way, shape, or form, whether it's getting a handoff or whether it's in the passing game, he's going to be involved with maybe touching the football in that play. So I think Denver's going to have to do a better job this year of maybe not showcasing that as much, like not making it a noticeable tendency. But I think you also saw him deal with, I think at the end of the season, was it the Las Vegas Raiders game? He went out with a concussion. You lost him. You're a little worried about his overall size. Like, if you're in a passing situation and you need a running back to do pass protection, you're going, max protection. Can Jaleel be that guy? Like, it's tough to put him in a situation because he's going to be going against bigger guys, but it's not that Jaleel is not willing to block. Like, Jaleel is going to be a guy just like Phillip Lindsay. He's going to throw his helmet into a guy, and he's going to try to do whatever he can to block. But when you talk about sustainability, like you don't want him to take unnecessary bumps and bruises in that situation. You don't want to give away tendencies, though. If he can be in there in passing situations as a blocker, it's harder for defenses to pick up on when they're reading who's the personnel coming in from the sideline after the previous play. So for me, I just think there's got to be a balance had here by Denver. But Jaleel, in my opinion, Sayre, I think last year we heard Sean say in those final 2 games is like, even Jaleel's come to me as a coach and he wants me to, he wants to do more. And he's like, so for us, we're like, how can we do more with Jaleel? The one thing that comes to mind, Sayre, is that joker rule, which we never got a chance to see at all in Sean Payton's offense last season. Now Sean gets a quarterback room that he likes. He gets an operation under center that's, probably to the standard in which he wants in terms of how he's going to call the offense. This might be the year we see it. And I think Jaleel is probably the primary guy that we can see in that. And there's going to be some competition behind him for that job. But Jaleel right now seems like the front runner to be the joker for Sean's offense this upcoming season.
And that kind of gets me excited about we revved the engine a little bit last year on the whole Darren Sproles talk, right? And and that's, a size comparison type of thing right there. Somebody who's played in Sean Payton's offense. And I think that, Jaleel could take that next step. He could take on more this year. 570 yards from scrimmage last season, 3 total touchdowns. Kind of crazy that his first rushing touchdown of the season, which was, I think, in the first or second game, was his only one of the year, which it's kind of wild to think about because of how effective he seemed to be throughout the season. Averaging over 5 yards a carry there. So 5.4 yards per carry on 4.5 attempts a game. And that's where I think he's talking about adding more to the plate because he did have 107 total touches. But remember, the Broncos passing game, there was no bread and butter. There was no short to intermediate passing game that really worked. And that happens to be a major strength of Bo Nix from just ask Bucky Irving, who just got drafted this year by, I believe, the Buccaneers or something like that. He's going to be effective in the NFL because of how often he was utilized in that short passing game. So I think that's where Jaleel can really make a lot of hay this coming season. And he's one of those types of guys that, look, the Broncos don't have a ton of speed at running back outside of him. There's some explosiveness from Javonte and from Audric Estime, who touched almost 21 miles per hour on the GPS in-game radar against, I believe it was, I can't remember what game it was last year, early in the season, Stanford. So he's done those types of things, but Jaleel is the type of guy that you might be able to touch 22, 23 miles per hour on the GPS if you get this guy out in space. And that's where I think the Broncos really need to best utilize him. You touched on the concussion late last season. I think the irony of that, Cody, is that I can't remember if it was Adam Archuleta or who the announcer that was calling the game had just gotten done complimenting Jaleel for his ability on tape. He's like, this guy's a small back. What he does really well is he avoids getting hit hard. And I think it was shortly after that he got hit real hard. So that's what he needs to continue to focus on and he was really good at it for the majority of the season, was avoiding taking those brutal hits that you oftentimes see for smaller guys. He just did a great job of kind of scatting out of bounds when he needed to, or getting to the ground when he needed to. So that's going to give him some longevity there. And I think it will allow him to take on more of a workload like he's been asking for.
Well, and also I think as well, just as a pass catcher out of the backfield, remember the screen he took against the Chicago Bears? He played big in that game. He's a big reason as well offensively that Denver was able to get some momentum to get into, enemy territory on some drives. And obviously Cortland Sutton had a big game that game. Marvin Mims had set up the game-winning field goal by Will Lutz. But Jaleel was a big reason the Broncos, after they got down, the defense obviously had a much better second half. But Jaleel is a big reason why the Broncos came storming back in that game against Chicago in week 4. And I just think that this is a kid who's got a massive chip on his shoulder. He comes in, he works hard. He's still the first guy in the building every day from what I've been told. So you love the work ethic. I think Sean loves that. I don't think Jaleel's roster spot is in question, to be honest with you. I think he's the one player right now at the running back position that you're not really questioning whether or not he's going to be on the team. I think he is going to be on the team. I think he's going to have probably a really big role at running back this year. But really behind Jaleel McLaughlin, if he's a guaranteed on the roster, if Javonte Williams is also a guarantee on the roster, what does that mean for the running back 3 spot? We'll tell you why we think it is wide open, and it could go any way here for Broncos Country. We'll tell you that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. As we jump to the fourth quarter action on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, we'll dive deeper into why we think the running back 3 spot, the competition for that position, is entirely wide open as the team continues organized team activities, preparing for the start of NFL training camp toward the end of July. Real quick, wanted to say thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you, Broncos Country. You can get the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. If you listen to us on a Monday or a Tuesday, we also have shows for you on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So make sure you're becoming an everyday listener, because every single day, all year long, we have fresh, objective coverage of your favorite team. We have a lot to talk about. There's always something to talk about versus recycling things to talk about every single day, like some other folks out there decide to do. We keep it fresh for you here, Broncos Country, and you make the show exactly what it is. So we appreciate you so much for doing just that. So, Sayre, let's talk about the running back 3 competition here. Based on what we saw at OTAs last week, I mean, really a lot of the focus was on Javonte. It was on Jaleel. We were all excited to see a little bit of Audric Estime, but he pulled up during that practice with an apparent issue, an apparent injury. Nothing big. I think it was just a minor pull, and then went over onto the team's side field. So we're going to monitor that this week when we attend practice. What is he doing there? I mean, all the reports and all the accounts that I've gotten so far on Estime is that, hey, he's fitting in nicely to what the team is doing. But right now, you really look at that running back 3 spot kind of as an open competition. I would say primarily between Audric Estime, Samaje Perine, obviously a veteran presence who came up big for the Broncos on third down in the passing game last season. I think he averaged over 9 yards per reception for Denver. I mean, he was kind of a clutch player there when Denver needed something in the passing game there. And then you have Tyler Beatty also in the mix. And then Blake Watson, the undrafted rookie free agent out of Memphis. And I think right now you're just seeing all these guys get reps, get opportunities there. The hardest part about evaluating this position right now, OTAs, really outside of just general observations as, okay, hey, he caught this pass, he dropped this pass, he's got explosive burst. There's no pads, right? There's no contact. So what does it look like when these guys are running into the hole and when it's a run play? Like, are they going to be tackled by a defender if there were pads? Or like, it's hard to really gauge that because guys aren't trying to bang these. Like, these running backs are trying to run in between the tackles. Guys that are coming up to do the tag up on defense, they're making sure like, hey, we don't want to go knee-to-knee contact at any point. We don't want any dead legs happening there. So it's just very like balanced. Like, how do you truly evaluate it? Like for me, Sayre, like I've been telling everyone, I think if we're going into every day of any of these position battles and we're trying to keep a scorecard, I think we're like Broncos fans are going to go crazy. Like the media, and the media is a big reason for this. Like we media drive people nuts because we're like, well, this guy won the day. We like this guy did this, but everyone sees the game differently. And I think that's where the bigger issue comes in is, you know, while someone may see something one way, it may be viewed entirely different by the coaching staff, or it may be viewed entirely different by another media member, and their perception on what's good and what's not good is often skewed. That's just the nature of the business. So that's why I'm not a big believer in keeping a scorecard, but what can we do in terms of general observations? What do we want to see from these guys when they're out there? Well, I think first and foremost, ball security, right? Is the vision there? Like when they get the handoff, if there's a cutback and they're supposed to take it, do they take it? Like those are the things that we look at. And we go back, and I think those are some of the things that I can tell you that coaches look at from what I know about it. It's just so hard to put it all into a vacuum. But I think running back 3 between Estime, Perine, Beatty, Watson, I like that competition room that's going on right there. And a lot of it's going to be predicated on who can be reliable in certain options and who's going to play special teams.
And I think Samaje gives them somebody that's going to be tough to beat, doesn't he? Because of how trustworthy he was last year in 2-minute drill. And we hear Sean Payton talk a lot of times about how important that aspect of the game is. Like a lot of your season could be determined in 2-minute drill. And Samaje Perine was the Broncos' most frequently targeted guy, I feel like, in 2-minute drill last year. And part of that was Russell Wilson's propensity to go after the check down in those situations. But part of it was like, man, this guy is just making plays. We were sitting here on the podcast after a number of games saying like, all right, let's run the Samaje Perine offense maybe with the first drive of the game and see how that goes, you know, have a little urgency. But ultimately, like he didn't even have 100 carries last season, which is kind of crazy to think about because he ran the ball pretty effectively. I feel like he gave the Broncos a spark. I feel like there was a stretch of time there around the winning streak last year where he was maybe the best back on the team. So he gives you that floor, I think, to shoot for if you're these young guys. If you're Audric Estime, Tyler Beatty, Blake Watson, the undrafted free agent. Like, if you're those guys, you have to find a way to be more trustworthy than Samaje Perine out there, which is going to be really tough to do. And it could ultimately force the Broncos to keep 4 running backs plus a fullback on the active roster, because just the way that things are going to be constructed now, I mean, you may have to do that type of thing, because what Samaje Perine brings to the table that no other running back on this roster does is he's got experience in big games. And look, I don't know how quickly the Broncos are expecting to get back to big games, but I mean, Samaje has played in the biggest of the big, right? He was with the Bengals when they went to the Super Bowl. He was with the Bengals when they upset the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs that a couple years back. I mean, he was on the Broncos last year when they upset the Kansas City Chiefs at home. So I think that this is one of those situations to where it's like, man, you want to see the team be able to roll with the young guys they drafted. You want to see the homegrown talent develop in-house and really be able to push guys like Samaje Perine off the roster. But also, like, I mean, at one point last year, for a stretch of games, not just for a game, for a stretch of games, he was the best back on the team. So that would be a tough pill to swallow if the Broncos do move on from him.
Well, you think about it as well. Like, the thing with Samaje is price tag and trustworthiness. Like, if he's trustworthy, then he's worth the price tag. But if the Broncos can find one of these young guys, and this is just the nature of how the business side is evaluated, but if you get one of these young guys that are vying for a roster spot that is trustworthy, you know what you're getting, they're reliable, but they're also cheaper from a financial aspect. I mean, that's what teams do during training camp. That's what they do after like the third final preseason game, when all the roster cuts happen, is they make a financial decision. Like, you know what, like, this guy, he's trustworthy, but he also costs us a little bit less. Like, you know, you're not going to approach Samaje and say, hey, can you take a pay cut right here before we start the season? Like, absolutely not. Like, Samaje wouldn't do that. He shouldn't have to. Like, he earned the contract that he got from his time in Cincinnati, and being able to trying to go back on that, like, that's not something that a lot of players should do for teams when teams do try to come knocking. But I think another thing that maybe we have to look at here, when we factor in maybe where Samaje fits into the mix here, when you combine Audric Estime, I think as well, you mentioned that, like, we talk about special teams, some of the changes that I feel like can really change roster construction this year, Sayre. Historically, we see more linebackers, or, you know, obviously you see a lot of safeties and corners. Maybe that transitions to where you're going to have more running backs and wide receivers with the new kickoff and kick return rules. Like, I think this is something we don't know yet, but hypothetically speaking, looking at it, this could change how final rosters are made based on the new format, based on how the blocking is. And that's why I think you got to get excited for a lot of these young guys. Like, if you're a special teams guy, you're like, hey, these rules have changed. Now I'm at a position there's a lot of guys at. How can I get onto the field? Well, if it's on special teams, it makes sure that I have a roster spot. It allows me to have a paycheck this year. It allows me to live my dream of playing the NFL. Like, go out there and make your hay and earn that, because I think it's going to change a lot going forward, how the new kick and kick return rules are going to be set up here for teams. And I think it's going to change the way that maybe the roster is constructed from a positional standpoint. I think running back and wide receiver are a spot where we may actually see more guys put on those, you know, you keep more on the 53-man roster because of that. So to me, an underrated aspect, I think, of what's to come here. And obviously Audric Estime, Broncos drafted him. The expectations are going to be a little bit higher for him. What's he going to look like this offseason? And, like, you know, I think, is he a guaranteed to make the roster? I think at this point, probably, but it would be something drastic that I would say would maybe indicate otherwise. Don't see that happening. So it means that the Broncos have some tough decisions that they're going to have to make at the running back position. Sean Payton acknowledged there's going to be a competition. It's going to be fun. We're going to break it down here every step of the way here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. But with that said, Broncos Country, that'll do it for today's episode of the show. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe or follow if you love today's episode of the show. For all you everydayers out there, here's what Sayre's going to bring to the table for you tomorrow. Who are some players on the Broncos offensive side of the ball who could be on the roster bubble? Well, guess what? Sayre is going to break that down and much more for all of you in Broncos Country on tomorrow's brand new episode of the show. We'll see you then.